What caused the end of your marriage? Story 1. Coming home from a trip, my husband picked me up from the airport in my car. I noticed that the back window was cracked open. It was the kind of small, triangular window that you have to crack open from the inside manually. I asked him who was sitting in the back seat. Without thinking, he said it was his best friend and the friend's wife. I asked, then who was sitting in the front seat? He laughed nervously and didn't answer. That was how I found out he was having an affair. Story 2. She cheated on me and got pregnant. Blamed it on me not giving her time and attention. I worked 2 jobs and was taking online classes in my spare time so I could get one. Just one better job instead of working 2, and so we could have a better life. Story 3. Nothing really went wrong. Nothing really went at all. We had been dating for 7 years, so we thought it was a safe bet. Realized a year into our marriage that we were better as separate people, and it fucking sucked. There were a ton of tears, a whole lot of begging not to let it end, a whole bunch of trying new things, living separately, splitting money, etc., so that we could be apart together, but it just didn't work. We were just live-in friends when it came down to it. And I think, too, that if we hadn't gotten married, we never would have seen it. It was sort of the impetus for us both to move on, as shitty as that might sound. It was a shakeup in our otherwise completely humdrum stable life, and it ended up working out for the best, but it fucking sucked for a long time. Story 4. Married to his job, dating his computer, no time for his wife. We moved across country for his job to a place I've never felt home at. I've been miserably homesick for nearly a decade, and he preferred where we used to live too, but wouldn't even consider a job change. Often he got home at 7-8 p.m. because he stayed late working. I was home alone 4 hours a day. He could keep the same schedule I did, just chose not to. Then he would want to watch TV or play computer games late, so I'd go to bed alone. Every night for years. He wanted the money and the job. He got it. I want a life outside of work and a partner who actually wants to spend time with me. Story 5. Hasn't ended yet, but maybe soon. Partner is unfulfilled and restless, in and out of jobs constantly, and wants to change countries every time depression hits, and also wants to have children, and doesn't understand why I don't feel secure and relaxed enough to do so. I am the main financial provider, stable and reliable, and I would love to just focus on what we have and where we are instead of throwing everything away. I've been living in anxiety for as long as we lived together, and didn't know why. Now I think I know, but I don't want to accept it, and I'm still working on broadening my horizon and relax a little, but it gets more difficult the more I try. Story 6. My ex is bipolar, and he would often go off his meds cold turkey for funsies, wreck our lives, then get back on them and try to repair everything, and I was sick of the chaos. Couple that with him quitting his job, lying to me about it, and continuing to leave for work in uniform at the same time for months. I never knew where he was going. Then once he disappeared for several days, and I nor his family knew where he went, turns out he went on a fishing trip with his friends and their wives, but he didn't want me to go, so he just never told anyone about it. So like I said, constant chaos, and I just couldn't deal anymore. Story 7. I went to work for 1/2 a day on my first day after maternity leave. My husband rushed out of the house kinda quick, said he was late for work. I checked on my 6-week-old son, and he had a bruise on the side of his face in the shape of a handprint. My husband hit him so hard he hemorrhaged the opposite eye. It took everything I had not to kill him. My biggest fear was I didn't want my son in foster care while I went through the process. I never saw this coming. He was always holding, feeding, changing him. Story 8. All work and no play makes Calypso dweller a dull girl. Was up at 5 a.m. every day, commuted 2 hours each way, full-time career, then cooked dinner to a waiting husband. He worked from home, who expected a 50s-style wife with child. I went to bed at midnight every day to keep up the home. Was tired of the sky-high expectations and insults. Moved closer to NYC and built a better life. Still soaring 22 years later. Story 9. My former spouse spiraled into addiction. Rehab was available, but drugs and alcohol were more attractive. 18 great years and 2 final years of hell before we parted ways. It started out as an annoyance I thought we could handle together, but no. The final straw was when the spouse pounded 2 beers in rapid succession, then drove off on a motorcycle that had been purchased by wiping out our savings. No. Story 10. L asked my ex for 3 things. 1. Get urgent home repairs done. 2. Stop speaking negatively to me. Literally would go months without a positive word to me. Always negging me, criticizing me, degrading me. 3. Put the thermostat above 60 in the winter. Worked from home, and it was so damned cold from November to April. L told him this in October. January, L moved out. He half-assed tried to do number 2, but would inevitably lapse back into negging when one of our adult sons was there. Swore he was trying, wanted to stay together. In actuality, had taken up with his ex from 40 years ago behind my back. Had said for 35 years that he hated her guts. Final straw was when he said, Elle had to accept her as part of his life if we stayed together. That was it for me. He prioritized her over me. Elle was done, scheduled appointment with attorney quietly. 2 weeks later, he called me and said very condescendingly that if Elle was going to be a baby about it, he would give her up. Cue surprised Pikachu face and outright sobs when Elle told him F at CK that S hash it. Elle was done. He picked her over me, and he could go live with her for all Elle cared. He thought he would keep all our financial assets. Attempted to hide the money he cashed out secretively, because he was so obviously a better person than me, and the judge would see how he deserved to keep his money. More surprised Pikachu when judge said he was a shyster and gave me my half. Haven't heard from him in almost 2 years and hope it stays that way. I'm an old lady. I'll have my friends, my kids and grandkids, a little part-time job and a nest egg for emergencies. Have no interest in remarrying or even dating. For the first time in my life, I'm doing what Elle want, when Elle want, and nobody to condemn me for it. Story 11. Dad cheated on Mom with one of his colleagues at work. It wasn't the adultery type of cheating, but he gave all his time and attention to her, would give and receive gifts, talk for hours on the phone, etc. And it wasn't his first time. Now my dad is trying to get back with my mom. They're not divorced, but are living in separate countries. But my mom refused completely. Story 12. She said she was unhappy, didn't love me anymore, refused to talk further about it or go to therapy, and 5.5 months later, we were divorced. We'd been together 23 years and have 3 daughters. At the time, I would have said our marriage was okay and typical, but in hindsight, it was a shitty, codependent relationship, and we didn't have much in common other than our daughters. Both of us had unresolved childhood trauma, and both of us were the asshole at some point in our marriage. Ultimately, it takes 2 people to make the relationship work. I was willing to take a long, hard look at myself and address my faults and try to change. She wasn't. I could write an entire essay on this, but I think this sums it up. Story the 13th of June. And he announces that he's going to take the summer off before looking for another job again. But our kid can keep going to daycare so he can have more free time. I can keep working because that's what pays the bills, and he can't do housework or cooking because then, what would be the point of having the summer off? This was years ago. I left him by the fall. He didn't believe that I was serious because who doesn't appreciate the great guy he was? Story 14. He wasn't willing to put in any effort to make it better. Anytime I tried to initiate a conversation about communicating more, etc., he would just blow up at me and tell me it was all my fault. He criticized me constantly. What I did, my body, what I chose to do with my time/money/career, how I parented. He wouldn't go to counseling. I was desperately unhappy. I told him over and over that I was going to leave if things didn't get better. His typical response was, "Bring me the papers, I'll sign them." We didn't have sex for 7 years, not from my lack of trying. I was on a trajectory of healing and dealing with my shit and facing my trauma and addictions head on, getting fitter and happier and more whole while he receded into a cave. I want a full life of adventure, sex, fun, and happiness, and apparently he wants to drink and watch sports on TV. Pulled the pin a year and a half ago and am never looking back. Story 15. My first marriage. We married as high school sweethearts together since our sophomore year. We lived in Washington State, but she got a job offer in Georgia that was a huge promotion, and she loved her work, so it was a huge opportunity for her. I was in community college to get my degree in business, so I told her I would put it on hold and we'll go to Georgia. I'll just enroll over there or something, so we make the move. 10 months later, I walked in on her fucking her coworker when I came home early to surprise her on her birthday. It had been going on for a few months, and she was working up the nerve to serve me with divorce papers. They're actually married to this day, almost 20 years later, so I guess she just found the right one and it wasn't me. Story 16. It's a long, weird story. We just moved into the house we'd finally bought after being married 9 years. We got into a fight, and at some point I asked, "Do you even love me anymore?" And she answered, "I don't know." Went to couples therapy for initial appointment, and when it came to be her time for a one-on-one appointment, she never showed. Our therapist called me out of concern. She wouldn't pick up for me either, so I leave my brand new job that I moved and bought a house for early to go check on her. She's on the phone with her mom, won't say why she missed the therapy appointment, says she doesn't want to do it and just wants to talk to me instead. Pissed off because I spent a shit ton of money we don't have on this therapy adventure, but fine, whatever. I figure she didn't like that therapist and I'd keep her talking until I could find another one. Months later, I accidentally found out she was talking to some 19-yo kid on the internet and had told him she loved him. We were in our early 30s at the time. Then she proceeds to hack all her hair off short and lose her entire mind. I was done. She'd had multiple chances to tell me what was going on in safe environments, with safe people, and still chose not to. She forced an argument the day before Thanksgiving, and I told her we were done. We had to go to our relatives and pretend everything was fine the next day. She won't get a job so she can leave, and I don't have the money to pay for her to leave. So things drag on for months after that. She finally decides to leave when I'm called to the other side of the fucking country for a work emergency of the if you don't do this, nobody gets paid and we fold up variety. So I spent a week in California while hoping my wife wasn't looting our house/destroying my shit out of spite. That was fun. My folks drove an hour to come feed my cats and make sure my house was still there for me. She just took whatever she could fit in her car and split. Fine with me. I haven't really ever spoken to her again. That's how it ended. We were married 10 years and together for a total of 15. We're strangers now. Story 17. Getting married. Together 10 years and one baby in, got married and bought a house. Second baby, communication was never great but got worse. Noticed and suggested we get counseling. She blamed everything on my arguably well-managed BPD. No acknowledgement of her part in the diminishing of the relationship's quality. Wasn't prepared to have my 10-year-old children believe that parents that argue or worse, give each other the silent treatment for days on end, is normal. Gave her a final ultimatum, counseling or Splitsville. She didn't believe me. Best outcome for all in the end, but it took ages to settle, and she still blames me. Story 18. We were both super young, immature. I was very naive and inexperienced. He had undiagnosed deep depression. He closed himself off. No communication, no happiness at all about anything, no sex. We were living away from my support, not anyone's fault, just life circumstances. And I relied on him for everything, which was not fair. I was young and didn't even know I was doing that until I looked back on it years later. All those things all mixed together made two very unhappy, sex-starved, non-communicative people. Story 19. Not yet, but soon. Lots of ignoring me and dismissing my feeling for years. Never tried to get me off during sex. Never wanted to go to therapy. Now, finally willing to go after I mentioned divorce multiple times. Apparently never thought I would actually do it before. But I've already grieved, so it's too late for me. Especially because this week found out he's snapping and texting an ex. Doesn't bother me as much since I told him I want to get divorced. What bothers me is finding out they were FB messaging 10 years ago when we were newlyweds saying how hard marriage is to each other. Won't you get in trouble for messaging me? No, my wife is out of town. Him saying I had a dream about you, etc. He doesn't know I found the messages and I don't even care enough to tell him I know, just ready to be done. Story 20. Ex-wife and I were completely incompatible with each other, and because of that, all we did was make each other miserable. I tried holding on to the marriage, but soon realized that I was getting too comfortable and complacent, but still miserable, and thought that's how all marriages are. However, after a big fight, and me trying to make it up to her by taking her on an awesome date, she said a sentence that I'll never forget, and that is, I feel like I'm on a date with a friend. That's when I realized this is no way to live. I literally tried and pulled all the stops for this date, but instead of being excited, I was anxious and stressed, which isn't something you should feel when you're doing something for the person you love. A week later, after the date, I asked for a divorce and the rest is history. Story 21. She basically said, "You're cheating on me and nothing you say will convince me otherwise. And you're going to give me your phone so I can prove it. But it's going to take a while because I don't know where or what the proof is. I just know it's there." She said if I didn't hand over the phone, she'd never trust me again. I said, "That's fine. I don't need you to ever trust me again." I left within the hour and never saw her again. After 13 years together, married almost 10. I never cheated. But after years of mental and emotional abuse, I'd had enough of her unhinged accusations. Story 22. There were a few things. One of the clearest was a coworker asking his aunt's second mother for my hairdresser's details because she liked my new cut. Meddling aunt rang his mother to yell at her because she hadn't been told there was a haircut and she'd been embarrassed and humiliated. Mother rang him to scream that her and aunt were embarrassed by not knowing there was a haircut. Why hadn't he told them? He then rang to scream at me because he didn't know there was a haircut and I had embarrassed him, his mother, his aunt, and probably the Pope by keeping secrets and deliberately withholding information. My haircut was 3 months old. I did it myself in front of him, and I cut it all off, some 3 feet of hair. All 3 of them had seen me multiple times since the cut. Not one of them had noticed my hair had gone from down my back to chin length. It made me realize just how invisible I was to them, how fast they jumped to blaming me, and that he'd lied for years about having no mobile phone signal at his works depot. Story 23. I had cancer for 7 years. The imaging company missed it 10 times. So pain management didn't help my symptoms, and nothing showed up on images, so she thought I was making up the pain to get out of doing things. She left the day I found out I had stage 3 cancer and accused me of making it up to stop her from leaving. We were together for 10 years, knew each other for over 20 years, and have a son together. It was one of the most cold-hearted things I've seen another human being do. To instantly go from a loving marriage to being treated like a con man was unreal. Then when she realized I actually had cancer, she tried to be involved and help me because she was worried about her image. She had the audacity to try to demand, I tell everyone I'm not letting her help me so she didn't look bad. That's not made up. That actually happened. Story 24. Over the years, I told him I wasn't happy, was never emotionally supported at home. He didn't take care of his own kids, didn't sleep with me or touch, didn't plan any dates. We were just grinding along like friends or housemates. Told me that I nagged him too much when in reality he used to come home after work, sit on the sofa and watch something on his phone. Didn't even bother to make conversation or offer to do the dishes for me. Last straw was when we did sleep together on the rare occasion. He would get off himself, then roll over without making sure I was satisfied. Story 25. On a Tuesday before Easter, my husband and I decided to go to the store and buy food to make for Easter dinner. So we got in the car and he drove us to the store. We walked into the store and he immediately turned around and ran back out. I just stood there looking at him. He started throwing up all over himself outside that door and was swaying like he was falling over. I ran out there and got him into a wheelchair. I thought his blood sugar dropped maybe, so we got home, I checked his blood sugar and it was not dropped. It was elevated a bit. We go to the emergency room. They started doing all kinds of things. Long story short, he was dead 6 or 7 hours later from a massive brain bleed. His brain and brainstem were completely filled with blood. It was unsurvivable. We were married 53 years since we were teenagers, and that is how my marriage ended. Story 26. First marriage was that I was just never really in the marriage. I didn't cheat or anything. I just realized one day I couldn't be with this person I didn't feel very much about, and I'm pretty sure she was feeling the same. I sort of got cornered into the marriage. Second was tougher. I was looking for security and stability, and to put down roots. She wanted to move around and change jobs every few years, and was really into finding her happiness. And so I became someone she was being held back by in her eyes. And she became someone I was feeling anxious and unsure about. We loved each other. I still love her. She is a good person. There are things that just can't be made into a compromise. After that one, I tried relationships and met other people, but I realized I just don't belong in a relationship. What I need and want are not really workable at my age. And my mental health issues, I know I am not able to go through that again. I am old enough and smart enough to know I have nothing left to give. Story 27. I worry that it's happening now. We've been building a house and effectively the builder has run off with the money and left us with tons of debt. We both make enough money that we can eventually in 5, 10 years be okay, but it is so stressful. Multiple lawsuits, non-stop extra work with court filings and police reports and financial stuff. We're often unkind to each other because the stress is so hardcore. I know we're both trying, but it might not be enough. Neither of us wants to be like this, but no amount of therapy makes this shit go away.